Hey, good morning. It's Tom Jordan. I went to the grocery store a few days ago. Eggs were on the list, but take a look at this. Eggs were not on the shelves. I took a photo because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It's like, are we back in 2020 during COVID again? Well, there are very few that were on the shelves here. That's the snapshot that I took. And you can see those bottom three shelves in the egg section. I won't tell you which grocery store it was, but it starts with a K. But it's everywhere. It's everywhere in the state of Michigan. This is happening. And so I went to look at the top shelf there to see, how much those eggs were. For a dozen, it was $7 in Michigan, $7 a dozen. So I went home without them, and I told my wife that, listen, we're going to have to hold off on the eggs for now. And she agreed. $7 a dozen is off the charts bad, and for now, it's just not worth it. And hopefully they come down. I don't know if they will, but where the soaring price of eggs in Michigan had been a result of inflation. Remember, they were about $1.80 in 2021 early on, and then they shot up to about $4 or so in late 2024. Well, now there's this going on. It is all about power. It's all about profit. It's all about political gamemanship, is what Charlie LeDuff has written about and made a cool video about it, too, because it's true. And we're going to get to him in a second here. There's this cozy alliance that he's talking about between Governor Gretchen Whitmer, these animal rights activists, and the corporate egg producers now are involved in this, brokered by one individual, a lobbyist who plays both sides of the issue. He was involved early on, and then he was involved last year, and here we are totally rigging the system, leaving people like you and me, everyday Michiganders, to foot the bill because of all of the cage-free mandate. This is what this is all about. Cage-free mandate just kicked in on January 1st. Grocery stores cannot sell any egg unless that chicken was not in a cage. Charlie LeDuff has written about this on Michigan Enjoyer and will join me in just a few seconds. Just want to remind you to chime in, to comment. Are you holding back on your egg purchases? Or what do you make of, we're going to get into the whole California wildfires as well. What led to that? More far-left liberal bureaucracy and dangerous policies that I believe, I was out there when it happened. They started doing this. We knew the end result would be more devastating wildfires. And sure enough, here's what's going on in California. I'd like to get your comments. You can ask questions. You can ask Charlie LeDuff questions too, and we'll get him to respond to them on the fly here. Just put them in the comment sections. I'll get to those in just a moment. And listen, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, X, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and then share the content. That helps quite a bit us keep going and keep doing our efforts here that we're trying to do, make a difference here at Tom Jordan Live. Thanks so much. All right, so skyrocketing egg prices. Michigan residents, they're facing some of the highest egg prices in the country, thanks to government overreach and these backroom deals. So in Ohio, just across the border, you can pay about $3.97 for a dozen eggs. Michiganders, Charlie LeDuff writes about Royal Oak. They're shelling out about $6.29. I was going to shell out $7 for the top shelf eggs because that's all that were left available. And I think those are the organic variety. Not only were they cage free, but there were also all these other things free as well, which means everything goes through the roof. We couldn't afford them. So $6.29 Royal Oak, San Francisco, they're paying about $9, $9 a dozen. And it's not just inflation. It's this policy-driven price gouging that's occurring. And for all the government talk about cracking down on price gougers, they're involved. They're right in the thick of it. And Michigan has already become California. They want to be what they have been for quite some time. And the political elite in the state, they planned for this. They're grinning about this. They're laughing about it because they've done it. They're all proud of themselves. But I'm not laughing, and I don't believe that fellow egg lovers are laughing either. So reporter Charlie LeDuff wrote about this for Michigan Enjoyer at enjoyer.com with a cool video to go along with his piece. You can also catch his stuff at nobsnewshour.com. Charlie LeDuff back on the program. Good to see you, Charlie. Thanks for writing about this. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Oh, you're welcome, man. In fact, I just rather listen to you. I don't want to have to stress it, have to think about it. You got it all. You got it perfectly.
No, I'm not trying to steal your thunder. In fact, you're the guy that
No.
you were there. You've taken video. You've tried to carry stacks of a dozen eggs and try to figure this all out. And I think you have figured it out. So, what is going on in the state of Michigan, and why are egg prices suddenly within a week or two through the roof?
Okay, well, we'll start with the BS that they give everybody. Okay, bird flu. Yes, there's bird flu going around the country. It's been going around the country for 3 years now, so that doesn't explain a skyrocketing price on Christmas Eve, right? Like um,
Right.
last year, mid-year, Michigan was forced to destroy about 7 million birds. It's one of the largest egg producers in the country, believe it or not. Michigan is.
Hmm.
Um, so what happened was back in 2009, the Humane Society came here with California's law. They were able to do this in California. So you see what's happening. And it was basically take the birds out of the little cages and put them in bigger cages where they could spread their wings and live more like humans, right? It's more humane. They had until 2020 to do that, to get the bigger cages. 2018 comes around and the farmers are like, we're not ready, we're not ready. The Humane Society says, goes to the farmers and says, we got an idea. Instead of bigger cages, how about no cages at all? How about all the birds get to run around in the barn, spread their wings, little house on the prairie? So that's the Humane Society comes. Snyder vetoes that bill. He's like, wait a minute. If it's cage free only, it's going to drive the price of eggs up. I veto that. The next year, Whitmer's in. The Humane Society comes back with this thing, except the lobbyist for the Humane Society for those 11 years, right? The one working with the animal rights is now the lobbyist for corporate egg.
Hmm.
So I called this guy up. I go, wait a minute, what happened here? He goes, well, in 2019, the Humane Society really had a gun to our head and we had to do this. And I'm like, but Pete, it was your gun. You were pointing the gun at yourself. It was nice of you to vent the gun, point it, and then step in front of your new clients. So it goes through, and we got till midnight, New Year's Eve this year for it to go into effect.
Yes.
That's why you saw all the egg prices explode, because places like Meijer and Kroger, they don't want to be holding these eggs on the shelf because you can't sell them anymore. Now, here's the sweetener. Why would corporate egg go along with this? It costs more to be cage free. The birds get sicker. They kill each other more. There's more parasites, more bacteria. It's not more humane. Why would they go for this? Why would Michigan, the sixth largest egg producer in America, go for this? Because there was a sweetener, a poison pill in there. And it was no caged egg raised anywhere in America is allowed to be sold in Michigan. It's contraband. No Indiana eggs, no Iowa eggs, no Missouri eggs. 70% of the eggs in the United States are grown in cages. So Michigan, its egg producers were already going to cage free before 2019. Now they're there. Now they got the market cornered. So if egg prices go up, there's no competition. We can't get a hold of the other 70% of the eggs in America. And that's why your egg prices went up. They're always going to stay up. Even if bird flu goes away, I'll put it to you this way. Before bird flu hit in 2021, inflation was already hitting. A dozen eggs in Michigan were going for $1.61 a dozen.
Well,
So
oh, is
even
that
if,
low? Okay. Yeah.
yeah, dude,
Yeah.
now some people say, hey, I got them for 4. I said, well, good for you. The reason the shelves are empty is because we can't replace those eggs. And one more thing, we are a net egg exporter in Michigan. The biggest egg farm in Michigan has exclusive rights to all of McDonald's east of the Mississippi. So
Oh,
they give
wow.
them to the corporate
Yeah.
accounts and then they raise them on grandma here.
All right, so they're all in this together. And listen, I was
Yeah.
back in California, 2008, I think was a year. I was a reporter out there, and they were trying to expand the chicken cages. That was like the first iteration of this, as you just aptly described. And they made bigger cages. And I spoke to Hollywood actress Alicia Silverstone, was her name. about this, and she was with the Humane Society. The Humane Society hired Alicia Silverstone to be the spokesperson for larger cages for the chickens. And as you know, she's just your typical Californian. Everyone else went along with her, and they voted this initiative in. It passed and everything. But now it's worse than that. Michigan, this is even more extreme than what they did in California back in 2008. And I think it caught a lot of us by surprise. I will admit I wasn't aware of this law until right around Christmas, when suddenly eggs were not on the shelves and there was signs being posted in Kroger and Meijer and other grocery stores about this. How come most of us weren't aware of this?
Because the media sucks. Next question.
That's exactly. It was kind of a rhetorical question because I knew you were going to say that, because that's exactly, we should have been told about this, and I in part blame myself
But
because I'm
if I could
part of the
interrupt
media.
there,
But
you know what, bro? The Michigan media, like the Lansing media in particular, you're so busy being late to the game on like the latest corrupt contract with the governor's friend, and right. Pay attention to the big things and stop pretending like you're in the game. If it has to do with our water, like Flint, pay attention. If it's got to do with the trees and power and food,
right,
pay attention.
yeah.
Right? That's it.
That's really the basics of government too. We're too splintered, I think. So this, as you said, this cage-free mandate in the state of Michigan, it essentially bans 70% of the nation's eggs. So that's obviously going to drive. It's good for the farmers, obviously the egg farmers in Michigan. It's good for the politicians, I guess. Why is it good for the politicians? Like, why? What Senator Governor Gretchen Whitmer and these far left liberal progressive Democrats? Why are they so opposed money? So campaign donations from the who are the lobbyists? Who are the ones that are really are in on this, trying to
Well,
essentially
it goes
effectively bribe these politicians?
like it's the politicians get chicken scratch, and the big interests get the whole cob. They get the whole cob. So
Yeah.
Humane Society gets donations for its puppies, and Big Ag gets profit. The lobbyist gets paid, and Grandma goes hungry. It's basically our politicians taking little bits in order to hang around, keep a job, and then maybe when they're term limited out, they go work for these special interests. It's a revolving door. It's do you know the head of the Michigan Department of Agriculture used to be the president of the Michigan Agribusiness Association.
Mm,
And the
mm.
new president of the Michigan Agribusiness Association used to be the lobbyist for the big egg farmer. And now
Hmm.
he's running the agribusiness, and
Wow.
the wife of the director of agriculture works for the big lobbying firm, the agribusiness. It's ridiculous. When Whitmer, like, here's what the lobbyist told me. It's in the story at enjoyer.com.
Yes.
Whitmer was beholden to the progressive wing because that's who funded her primary run,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that this is what you have.
Yeah. So talk about this, because the Gretchen Whitmer administration, she's obviously getting a lot of help with this well-connected lobbyist who has flip-flopped back and forth, whatever whichever way the winds are blowing over the years on this issue. And so she imposes these cage-free regulations shortly after taking office, and then this lobbyist somehow is able to connect himself to her and to these corporations. Who is this guy? Where does he come from?
He's Pete Rudell. He's a partner at Honingman, big law firm. And and to Pete was open. It's not illegal what Pete's doing. This is his job. He's a lawyer. You hire the lawyer. There's a deeper game in there. You know what I mean? So um, we had Lansing's corrupt. You can't blame it on the lawyers. You gotta blame it on the politicians not really
Well,
looking
yeah,
out
they're
for
the
us.
ones that are acquiescing to the lawyers and to the lobbyists. The lobbyists have a job to do. You're right; it's not illegal to do what they're doing, and an attorney's going to do what an attorney does, good or
Mm-hmm.
bad or whatever. But the fact that now that's the real concern we have here, and so we got the Gretchen Whitmer administration. We got we got politicians on both sides of the aisle doing the exact same thing. So you look at this, and are policy decisions, in your view, right now, effectively being dictated by these political backers to like a Whitmer campaign rather than the ones that we're putting in office.
Basically, are you saying are our elected officials puppets of big interests?
Yes.
I think everybody listening knows,
Yeah.
but you know
I think it's
that's
also
why
a
the national
rhetorical question.
election went the way it did.
Can you? I want you to touch on this because you mentioned this in your piece about these studies that show that the whole idea of cage-free chickens, it's a very humane way to go because it's going to be safer for the hen, the chicken, and whatever you want to call it, a rooster or whatever it is. But in reality, you touched on bird flu. Bird flu spreads much more quickly when they're out of their cages. You mentioned you just touched on briefly how they're like the mafia in there. They're like killing each other. These chickens are when they're not protected by their own little cages. What's more humane? I mean, describe the situation in these cage-free farms. What's going on inside this little chicken community?
It's there's the term pecking order for a reason, right? Remember?
Yeah.
So like you go, you went to the store and you looked at those $7 eggs, right? And it says pasture raised or organic, and it's got
Yes.
Little House on the Prairie pictures on it. And you're like, oh, it's really nice. There's a happy bird, better egg, right? Well, first of all, the nutrition in the eggs doesn't vary at all. That has to do with the quality of feed. That's all. So the idea of these barns is so a chicken can act more natural, stretch out its wings, get a yawn, wake up to the sun, have a cup of Joe. It's not like that. I actually worked in one of these for about 3 days in Carolina. Chicken wrangler. You got to wrangle them up. The barns are dark. They're lit red. They're dusty. The chickens are walking around in their own waste, right?
Hmm.
Chickens wash themselves by dusting themselves. So they're throwing other feces on themselves.
Hmm.
So there's bacteria, there's parasites, there's higher rates of salmonella and higher rates of cannibalism and pecking deaths. So
Ah.
that's what happens in there. And why does, obviously bird flu spreads because, you know, they're all rubbing on each other, but also when they're in cages, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever it might be, you know which birds have been vaccinated.
Hmm.
You understand what I mean? So in the
Yeah.
barns, they don't tag them like, hey, that one's been vaccinated and that. So it's a really difficult, costly way to raise eggs. And look, I had chickens back in, California. Um, Loved them. It is nice to have them, but when you're making food on an industrial level, and we all are on that chain, right? We all realize it now. That's not the way to go. It's not cost effective, and we don't want it. And we all might have voted for, hey, you know what? Cage free sounds great. Why don't we do that? Because of this. That's why people don't know. People vote for, you know, let's raise the minimum wage and get rid of tips, and they don't. It sounds good, sick
Hmm.
leave, and then they don't realize it till all the cost gets passed on to them. And again, I'll say this and let you in on your own show. When this was exploding, I'm looking at the dying newspapers and their reporters are getting into, well, the Republicans sponsored this bill in 2019. They're doing the inside baseball. Give me the big picture. Why didn't you tell me before? And why did the Republicans sponsor this? Because the egg industry went to them and go, hey, bro, if you don't do this, we're screwed because we're not going to be able to get the big cages in by next year. And they're really going to destroy us and fine us. And it's going to be cost prohibitive. So even your representatives don't know what the hell's going on. They don't know what the hell's going on. They don't care.
We often think that, the pendulum always, is swinging one way and it's going to come back this other direction. I don't know if it will with this because you mentioned in California, San Francisco, the cost of a dozen eggs there is $9 for a dozen eggs. It's only been going that one way. The pendulum keeps going further and further to the left, and it's becoming more and more expensive. It doesn't swing back. So, are we stuck? You mentioned people don't know what they're voting for until it's too late. Is it too late? Are we done? Do we have to keep going down to Ohio or Indiana to buy your eggs?
I Look, this could be reversed. It's the arcane nature of Michigan law, but there was no appropriations bill assigned to this. It's arcane, but you can go in and tear the law up. But now, if you go in and tear the law up, you kind of screwed the Michigan egg industry because
Right.
they've converted, right? And
Yes.
now that they've converted, they can't go back. And you know what I'm saying? Put them out of business. So necessarily, not necessarily, but now it's locked in. They can't have the cheaper competition because this is like a $1.5 billion industry to Michigan. So good luck with that.
Yeah. I don't know what to do. It's sad. Do you have any thoughts about? You mentioned you were out in California for a time, and there's these fires out there. And when I was out in California, what used to be mandated, you just used to have these fire breaks on these, in these mountains and in these canyons, and that was common practice in California. You would do your brush management and the forest management, because we know every single year these fires are going to come through. Santa Ana winds are very common out there, and it blows these wildfires, and that's why you do it. It was common practice. In recent years, they've stopped doing that for the most part, and they've allowed this dry brush to continue to grow into power lines and whatnot, and they're diverting water. They are diverting water back out to the ocean, and Gavin Newsom has knocked down these dams that prevent people from having enough water in their own communities. So do you equate? It's kind of what's happening with the chickens, eggs, and whatnot in California and Michigan. It's this government mandated kind of stuff. Is that what's happening? Do you think with the fires out in California?
Well, I know I worked for the New York Times out there. I covered 6 wildfires at least in my time out there. Um, there's so much there, my friend. Let me just say, I don't want to get too into it, but you've got Malibu on fire. Malibu's burned heavily. That's, eucalyptus trees. They have oil in them. You've seen Malibu burn before. You're
Mm-hmm.
seeing the 405 burn. You're seeing the
Mm-hmm.
San Fernando Valley in the north burn. You're seeing the Hollywood Hills in the middle of LA burn. And then to the northwest, Pasadena and Altadena and these places. Now the fire is getting into the Angeles National Forest. So if you really look at it, all of the LA basin is on fire. I've never seen that ever. The
No.
fire hydrants don't work. That I used to cover the fire department out there. That's a problem. So now we're getting into, well, the reservoirs were full. It was not enough pressure to fill the hydrants. And I'm like, that means the pumps didn't work, Gavin. You're an idiot. You're an idiot. Oh, by the way, let's divert the water. Why? To save the smelt, right? In the
Right.
Sacramento River. Okay. They suspended that in October. That was watch this. It was a very wet year this year. They had record rainfall the last two
Mm-hmm.
years,
They
believe
did.
it or not. And when it rains, the forest grows, and the forest is, it's a desert forest. So they really have a lot of oil in them. And if you don't prune them, if you don't do fire breaks, if you don't test your fire hydrants, when they say $17 million they took out of the fire department, you got to add in inflation. That's
Mm-hmm.
actually $18 million.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They're incompetent. They wrecked the second most beautiful state. New York, I think, is a more beautiful state, but paradise. They ruined it, dude.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I used to cover those wildfires for many years too, but I was further south in San Diego, and sometimes we go up to the San Bernardino Mountains up by like Lake Arrowhead and Big Bear and up there because the fires were commonplace. But what happens? Yeah, we got a lot of rain. Or they got a lot of rain, but the rain falls, January, February, March, and maybe April, and it gets nice and green. It grows fast, but then it dries out over the summertime. By September and October, the Santa Ana wind kicks in, and there's a lot to burn. But they didn't trim it back, so I think there's these decisions that have been made by the likes of Jerry Brown after he became governor, and then of course Gavin Newsom, same types of policies, maybe even worse, and it's concerning. And I don't know. Bernie Sanders comes out and says it's all because of global warming or climate change. And I think, well, actually, even if that's the case, and I've heard this being said as well, even if that was the case, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to start doing fire breaks once again in these thick canyons? Why, if it is climate change, then do something about it. I don't think it is. I think it's just complete mismanagement. I grew
Oh,
up with
you're
fires out in
100.
California. It was commonplace, and we knew out east of I-5, the whole place was going to be torn up by wildfires every single year, and it was common practice. Now people live out there, and in these little steep slopes and canyons and mountains like Malibu and Pacific Palisades and whatnot. So I think it's mismanagement. I think, it may be drier out there nowadays. I don't know. But still, what are you going to do about it? You're going to sit there
Well,
and
dude,
complain about it.
I lived in Hollywood proper, not Hollywood Hills, in the cement with the people.
Right.
And
Yeah.
just up Santa Monica Boulevard in Western, right? It got evacuated. The cement city got evacuated. Now I remember one time, because where I live was near Koreatown, right? And me and these Korean dudes that didn't speak much English, old guys, and we're looking at the Hollywood Hills burn. And I said to them, I said, that's why we live in Hollywood proper. And they laughed. And now Hollywood proper is burning. Like,
Yes.
where the Kodak Theater,
Yeah.
where the
Oh,
Oscars,
yeah, for sure. Yep.
that was in danger of burning down.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Like
that's,
the
as you
Hollywood
mentioned,
Boulevard.
concrete cement city. So, yeah, I don't know what's happening out there, but they need water. They had water. They let it go. And, when you have tens of millions of people living in a state like that, you've got to reroute the water to the people and not, put it back out in the ocean to protect the smelt, as you said, and to increase the salmon population and the rainbow
And
trout
pay for
population.
illegals and
Yeah.
encourage bums to come. I'm sorry, because do you know in California they still give cash to able-bodied men who won't work?
Yeah.
Did you know
They have a
that?
$1.2 billion budget in Los Angeles for the homeless, and they have like
Wow.
700 million or something for the fire
Time out, time out,
mitigation.
time out, time out, time out. A $1.2 billion budget just for the homeless.
Just for the
As a
homeless.
comparison,
Hmm.
$1.2 billion is the entire budget of the city of Detroit.
Yeah. Can you believe that? Yeah. They're
Wow.
giving the money out. So it only perpetuates the problem. It doesn't fix it. You know that. I know that. And hopefully more people will realize what's happening with these ridiculous policies that cause your taxes to go up and make your cost of living continue to go up as well, just like we're seeing with the eggs in the state of Michigan for political favors.
Now
And
all the convenient, rich liberals living
yeah.
in the canyons of LA. Hey, bro, it just came home to bring it around. It just came home to roost. It's
Yep.
competency.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a hater. I speak Spanish. I don't know about that. You know what I mean? I wrap my hands around homeless,
Yes.
prostitute, trans people. I do. Hey, you all right? You need a
Right.
couple bucks. Like, F off. F off. We need the government. Like, Bernie, it's not global warming. Do you realize, Bernie, population's growing exponentially?
Mm.
People move out
Yeah.
into these places,
Yes.
and you got to manage it like Tom's saying. And it's not the 1900s, the gold rush of the 1800s. We got to dam the river so we can get the water down here and we can create
Yes.
power, because without it, it's anarchy and fire.
Yes. Yeah. So when you got Gavin Newsom partnering with BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, not the Black Lives Matter, but Bureau of Land Management, and they're all celebrating the tearing down of dams that hurt people, something's amiss. I appreciate you so much, and I always appreciate your work and for taking the time to come on with me. And if you haven't seen his piece, read it because it's enlightening. And only Charlie digs this stuff up nowadays. Enjoyer.com. It's Michigan Enjoyer, but go to enjoyer.com. He's got great video. Also, check out Charlie's own page, his own podcast at nobsnewshour.com. Charlie, it's always so good to see you, my friend. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. And call me later, man. I got a big one cooking.
All right,
Big.
I'll give you a ring. Call me.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
So you think about the economic harm to families, policies like Michigan's cage-free eggs mandate. It's really a blatant disregard for the financial realities of everyday families by effectively banning 70% of affordable eggs. They're not allowed to be sold any longer in Michigan. And the state has forced the hard-working Michiganders or Michiganians or Michiganish to pay more for a basic necessity, a staple. And now they're finally admitting, hey, eggs are actually healthy for you. Eggs are good for you. But guess what? They're too expensive for you to buy now. So it exacerbates the financial strain that many are already feeling in these very difficult economic times in a state that is becoming one of the least affordable in the country. It didn't used to be this way just 10 years ago. So the corporate manipulation that is in of the policy, the real winners in the so-called ethical policy, they're not the hens, they're not their families. It's the corporate agricultural industry that is now partnering with the government, backed by lobbyists, to make this happen. And they're all backing this mandate that eliminates competition. It's essentially a monopoly now. The cage-free egg producers are now totally in control in the state of Michigan, and that's a special interest group. It's about 30% of all the eggs produced are these types, pasture raised, and you see all the types there. They're very expensive, and so no more out of state producers can't come into Michigan. And so they've monopolized the market, and it's to their benefit, but not to ours. And I don't know what's going to happen because, as I said earlier, and I showed you that photograph of me in a store, wanted to buy eggs for my wife and my kids, and I'm like, I'm not buying $7 a dozen eggs. Maybe we'll find another way to do it. Maybe we'll buy our own chickens. I don't think that's necessarily economically efficient either, but I don't know. We got to figure something else out here because we're really getting back into eggs. I love eggs. So instead of serving the people, the politicians are bending over backward to satisfy the national activist agendas, leaving residents to bear the cost of these misguided mandates. Again, under this kind of mentality, an authoritarian regime, you are being told what you are allowed to eat. All right. To the California wildfires now, the blame game is not just coming from California residents who've lost their homes because of what they say is a purposeful effort to stop fighting fires by the likes of Governor Gavin Newsom. And I applaud, Donald Trump for criticizing him because it's the obvious thing to do because Governor Gavin Newsom, I mentioned Jerry Brown before. He was the governor prior to Newsom. The state legislature out there, they are so opposed, not publicly necessarily, but they are opposed to fighting that or preventing that from occurring. And there's for a few reasons for it. They do prioritize animals over people. And we're talking, when I say animals, an almost extinct fish called the smelt, also salmon and trout. I love salmon. I love trout. I probably would like smelt if I ever met one. But I love people more. And this is what's happening now to people in a huge number of populations. I've never seen it that bad. I've covered many of those, but not that bad where it's so expansive in the heart of the cities, too. So it's not just the Californians who are criticizing the governor. It's coming from the other side of the country as well. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis calling out both the California leadership, of course, but he's also calling out the media because these reporters are asking him and other governors if it was appropriate for Donald Trump to criticize Governor Gavin Newsom for his lack of preparedness for these known natural disasters. And here's how Ron DeSantis responded.
Is it appropriate for the president-elect or a president to be criticizing?
Is it appropriate for people in your industry to try to create division and to try to create narratives anytime these things happen? Now, you're not as interested in doing that because Newsom is a D. If Newsom was a Republican, you guys would you would have him nailed to the wall for what they're doing over there. And I know we've dealt with it. We just assume in Florida, anytime something happens, it's going to be politicized by the media. So you guys sitting in judgment of Donald Trump, I mean, excuse me, I think your track record of politicizing these things is very, very bad.
Okay, last question.
Newsom should resign and that the wildfires are all his fault. So do you agree with those comments?
I remember when we had the Surfside Tower collapse, I had people from the Washington Post trying to blame me for it immediately without having any facts or anything. Oh, he didn't declare a state of emergency. First of all, state of emergency doesn't mean you can't respond. It's all that. Excuse me?
Biden did it. I think that's what you said.
Well, but what I'm telling you is you guys are trying to make an issue of it when I have watched from this seat. In fact, when I got elected governor, I was meeting with some of the other Republican governors, and what they would say is, hey, if you have a natural disaster, just know media's coming at you, they're going to do it. It's not the same. That mayor of L.A., if that were a Republican mayor, I could only imagine what that would do. I mean, you know the fires are at high risk, and you try to go to Africa or wherever she was to go on some type of voyage. You should have been there preparing and doing that, and yet I don't see a lot of heat being directed in that thing. And so, I'd like to see some balance on how this is done. You could criticize the president-elect, but I think you also have to hold these other people accountable, and I have not seen that.
Yeah, good for him because listen, you can criticize Donald Trump all you want and all, Gavin Newsom can criticize him, Nancy Pelosi, blah, 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 Gretchen Whitmer. But when Trump criticizes them, somehow the media says, is that appropriate for a president-elect to dare criticize the governor? when we know, when I say we, I think most people understand if they just look at it, what's happening out there in California and why these fires are getting worse and worse. And again, it's not global warming. They've completely mismanaged this. The number of the population growth, as Charlie mentioned, the population growth out there is so expansive, and it has been into these fire-prone areas. It's like moving into a flood zone, and a flood comes. I mean, and you've never prepared for the flood, but you know the flood's coming, and or there were barricades to prevent floods from damaging homes, so you take away the barricades to allow the floods to come in and wipe these homes away. That's the same. That's what's happening here with these fires. To give you an analogy, they've taken away the fire prevention efforts in these neighborhoods, and the insurance companies are fleeing the state because the fires have gotten so bad as a result of these policies. The fires used to be really bad when I was growing up in California. So don't buy, and that was the 70s when they were saying, there was, an ice age coming. So the fires have been historically horrific out there for decades, probably centuries, probably millennia, because it is a desert in California. Even along the coast there, it's a semi-desert along the coast. So it's very, very dry conditions, especially in Southern California. So Governor Ron DeSantis, good for him, and these other governors out there, they call out what obviously he perceives. This is media bias in the coverage of California's leadership. And I think that he did a good job by standing there at Mar-a-Lago with these other governors. So Southern California is burning here, and the crisis underscores not just environmental challenges, but also the glaring divide in how political leaders are scrutinized during disasters. Gavin Newsom should be held accountable for this, not because of the fire, but because of what he's allowed the fire to do, knowing fires are going to come. And Karen Bass said, why was she in Ghana? The more I'm learning about it is that they knew these conditions were coming. They knew how dry it was. And whenever this happens, fires are breaking out. We as reporters out there would prepare. Hey, Santa Anas are coming on Wednesday. Today's Sunday. Okay, let's start planning our coverage because we know there are going to be fires and they could be pretty damaging and extensive. So let's get our people in place. No one's taking any time off. All hands on deck. And then she leaves. I don't believe that she didn't realize the true fire threat. And if she didn't, that's even worse. So what's the latest out there as they're tearing through Southern California? It's really bad. There's all of that, of course, but there's the Palisades fire, there's the Eden fire, there's the Kenneth fire, the Hearst fire, and Lydia fires. They've scorched now more than 27,000 acres, and they've destroyed more than 10,000 homes. Look at that, 10,000 homes and businesses, and at least now 10 lives have been lost. It's probably going to be a lot more than that, but that's what they know right now. About 10 lives have been lost, and officials are trying to work tirelessly to, contain the blazes. The critics are arguing that the state leadership again has failed to prioritize wildfire prevention. They have. The Eaton fire alone, that's claimed 7 lives in that one fire. Though LA County Fire Chief Anthony Maroney announced that there is progress in halting the spread of that. I think the winds are getting better as well. They've really ramped up the number of firefighting personnel on the scene out there. Law enforcement has also, by the way, they've arrested 20 suspected looters who are preying on these vulnerable communities. Yeah, looting is not something that I look favorably upon, and I don't think it should be. It should be going back to the days of this is, people talk about price gouging. What about looters? The same people that talk about price gouging and we're going to crack down on those businesses, they should be cracking down on the looters just as hard, if not more. All right, we're going to take your comments right now and some of your questions as we're going to keep watching this over the weekend as well. We'll have an update on Monday, of course. Let's start with some questions. Hey, Harry Sakalian. By the way, Harry Sakalian and I met yesterday. I'll put a photo out on Twitter with Harry, but good guy. Greetings, Tom. Greetings, Harry. Looks like I'll be eating all my omelets in Florida. Regards, Harry Sakalian. Yeah, Florida's a great state, and I think the eggs are much cheaper in the great state of Florida than they are in Michigan, and we're bumping up against California. $9 a dozen in California, San Francisco. And I just went to the store. The only ones that I could see were above $7 a dozen in the state of Michigan. So I don't know if we could turn this around. I certainly hope we can. But as Charlie mentioned, the businesses are all now, the farmers are all geared up now doing cage-free in the state. So if you reverse it, the sooner the better. And I don't have a lot of confidence in the next 2 years that's going to happen. because we still have a Democrat-controlled Senate and a Democratic governor who loves this cage-free stuff. But we do have a Republican House, so at least it stops the progression of the progressives. But we'll see what happens in a couple years. Harry, good to see you. Thank you so much. Let's bring up one more here before we say so long. Jim Chikowski is back. Hi, Jim. How many, if any, of these nonsensical laws are the Republicans able to undo? That's the question. Is it too late? Some of the things is going to be incredibly difficult to undo because we have some of these are constitutional mandate driven. 2022. You put these mandates in the Constitution, and then laws are created on the vague verbiage of the Constitution to allow you to interpret those vague descriptions in the Constitution how you see fit. And these laws are created based on that. It's very difficult to change the verbiage of the Constitution. So you got to get a majority of Michiganders to, put these more initiatives through and vote on them at the polls in order to do a constitutional amendment. As it comes to this egg thing, I think it can be undone, but I've just seen it happen in these other states where it just gets worse and worse, and you create a monopoly. No one's monopoly busting the chicken industry, and the government, in fact, is supporting it. So I would certainly hope that this does become a priority, but again, it becomes a big public relations game. And the news media is on the Democrat side here. So you got Republicans, if they come in and say, we are going to get rid of this cage-free law in the state of Michigan, you can hear the narrative right now ahead of time. And it's going to be that Republicans hate animals, they're inhumane, they hate chickens, they want to destroy their lives, and they're abusers, blah, blah, blah. Go down the list. And what the reporters in the state of Michigan, very few of them, most of them are not telling you that actually the whole, I love the way that Charlie LeDuff described it. What really happens, and he knows because he worked in one of these cage-free chicken coops, or whatever you call them, barns, that the spread of disease is rampant. It's filthy conditions. They're walking around in their own feces, and they're spreading it to the other chickens, so you get the rise in salmonella poisoning and all sorts of things like that. And the pecking order, so you've got, some chickens are whacking these other chickens. It's like the mafia in there. Cannibalism amongst the chickens. I mean, it's pretty disgusting. That's what cage-free laws support. So I am, just for the record now, the more I'm learning about it, I am no longer supportive of cage-free. And I have been, actually. We've been buying cage-free eggs for a long time, but the more you learn, you're like, wait a second. This is kind of antithetical to what I thought this is all about. So, all right. I think that's it with the comments for now. I want to thank you for being a part of the program today, as always. We have a big show on Monday, of course, 9 a.m. We'll also have updates on all the breaking news over the weekend as it relates to the California wildfires and what was said by these politicians. We'll have a Manic Monday on Monday with some sound bites from that as well. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Make sure you can share the content. We're on Facebook, on X, on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. Wherever you can find your podcast, you can find Tom Jordan Live. Thanks for your support just by watching and sharing. That's all we ask. God bless you. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday.